Thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. My name is Cindy Fung. I'm a product manager for the Guardium, the product management team, and my focus area is to work with customers and our partners, and IBM partners. So what I'd like to do today is really talk about how to help you with protecting and securing your data in today's high cybercrime risk environment. And the title of this presentation is really around protecting your crown jewels, your critical assets, which is the data that cyber criminals are after. So in today's world, there's just a complete shift in technology and paradigm in terms of cyber crime. You know, it's no longer a train robbery or doing a phone scam. It's really the big money and big business is around cyber crime. The level of sophistication and the amount of money cyber criminals are able to make from these attacks and exploiting risks and vulnerabilities in customer installations, the sophistication is really increasing, and attacks are much more targeted. Cyber criminals know exactly what they need to get to make money and make lots of money. And not only that, they're much more organized, and you know, they are structured just like any other business with a syndicated global management architecture that is well equipped for global orchestration of the most sinister intent. And ironically, they work from 9 to 5, just like any other business. It's a job for them. So we know that you know, our customers need to basically respond and have an effective way to counteract that level of organization and sophistication. Unfortunately, everyone now is a target. I myself have personally been affected by the U.S. attack at the Target retailer. I was one of the shoppers using my credit card during the Christmas holidays, a couple of holidays ago. I'm also a Chase bank customer, you know, one of the largest U.S. banks, and they've also been attacked. So even the most sophisticated companies are vulnerable, and customers need to really bring and take advantage of a type of sophistication research that IBM could bring to bear to help you counteract that type of vulnerability and reduce and minimize the risk. So you can see that this chart is from IBM's research called X-Force, and it basically shows the publicly reported breaches, and each dot represents a different breach, and the color showing a different type of attack, and the size of the breach showing the relative impact. Actually, these does not include the results from 2004. Some of the well-known ones are the ones that I've mentioned at Target, at Home Depot, of course, in Sony Pictures, and even this year, you know, we've heard that last month, the announcement that about 100 or more banks across the world have been attacked, and they could stand to lose billions of dollars from these attacks. And it's only getting worse, and it's not going to get better if we don't implement a secure and protective defense. So what you see here is really the cost of an average breach. You know, and actually this number does not include some of the recent ones that we hear about, you know, such as Target and Home Depot in the U.S., Sony Pictures and the banks. You know, these are just the typical average customers, and you could see that the impact is significant. And not only that, but most of the companies that we've talked to, they feel that the cyber theft and crimes are really the greatest threats to them, not only in terms of the customer records being stolen, right, and being turned into profit and siphoning off bank accounts, your bank accounts and mine, but also the intellectual properties that's becoming a much more sophisticated, organized, and even government-sponsored activities. So, Sony Pictures certainly has seen that kind of decline in impact, but that's why we're saying that it's not only the customer data that you need to also protect everything that's a critical asset, your crown jewels in the company, which also includes your intellectual property, as well as your company's strategic plans and sensitive information as well. This is another piece of information that we're reporting from Verizon. They have a team that analyzes risks and breaches in the digital world, and they also look at attack trends and pattern changes, similar to IBM's X-Force research. For several years, they've seen a trend where the majority of record breaches came from databases, because that's where the majority of the information is residing, and that's where cyber criminals are targeting, because that's the rich source of revenue for them. They get paid, $5, $10 per customer record. They would make a lot more money if they could steal millions as opposed to 10 or 20 of them. So, we're reaching the conclusion that databases is a major point of compromise and a key target for cyber criminals. And, so we're basically saying keep your defenses as close to where the data resides and protect that information and prevent data lost from these attacks. This is one of my favorite pictures from the perspective that, it's not only external threats that companies need to protect against, they also need to protect against any type of internal threats as well, or risk, either disgruntled employee, and of course nowadays with the sophistication of cyber attacks, cyber criminals are really looking at different ways to find privileged users and basically steal their authorizations to get access to the database data and company critical data. So, so not only thinking about internal threats, but also protecting against external threats in terms of someone able to steal your privileged users' credentials and to be able to do significant damage to the company. So because of these severity and increasing frequency of threats and the perceived threat and the significant revenue lost, as well as brand and loyalty damage to a company, that, so the focus of the conversation is no longer confined to the CXO level in terms of the Chief Information Security Officer or the Chief Information Officer or the Chief Technology Officer. Now it's really at the CEO level and is part of the boardroom conversation. They're demanding what should be the strategy for the company to really truly protect critical assets and prevent data losses from cyber attacks. Really, the way we see it is the goal is to close the data exposure gap. What you want to do is to be able to, one, harden your systems to elongate the time criminals could penetrate your defenses. The other aspect is to basically enable you to be able to discover any type of attack very quickly, preferably in real time, so you could prevent the loss and mitigate the damage. So this leads us to what we have to offer today, which is the Guardium Data Security and Privacy Solution. What we can do is help prevent data breaches and prevent data loss, ensuring data privacy, as well as reducing the cost of compliance with automation and centralized controls, and also to help identify the risks involved and be able to help you harden the environment. And Guardium actually supports a variety of environments, from on-premise data sources, hybrid to cloud, both for data at rest and data in motion, across a number of platforms, and also addressing a number of data sources. As you could see, in today's world, right, it's no longer an on-premise, but everyone wants to either have a hybrid environment as well as a cloud environment to be that much more flexible, more cost-effective. And the deployment scenarios are also much more sophisticated in terms of the type of devices and networks and where they reside. So this level of deployment scenario, Guardium can cover and cover well. So how does Guardium do it? Basically, first we would help customers identify and discover where all the sensitive data resides. Then we would offer solutions to help protect that sensitive data. And that's basically the data at rest category. And we would also help you do a vulnerability assessment of your systems, whether there are dormant entitlements in terms of who's accessing the data, whether you have privileged users that have left the company or haven't changed and removed that access. So we was able to help you discover all of that and harden the access and remove any dormant entitlements and prevent unauthorized accesses, as well as help you monitor what's going on in real time and block and prevent unauthorized activities. Those are the key things that Guardium could help do in addition to helping to mask the sensitive information to reduce that risk. So Guardium will help you with data at rest, protecting that data, configuration management, hardening your environment, as well as protecting that data and monitoring and giving you a good idea of what's happening in real time, sending real-time alerts, and also to prevent data losses and unauthorized access. And one of the things that we could do is with adding security policies, looking at dormant data and dormant entitlements, and also help with compliance reporting to give you a very robust view of your environment and easily be able to see that from a single point of view across the entire enterprise. Okay. So what does Guardium offer in terms of functionality with the 4 key steps in the holistic view of protecting sensitive data? So included in our base product is the discovery of sensitive information, help you classify, integrate across the enterprise, generate reports about activities, and you could also do some intelligence analysis on it, define thresholds and alerts in real time, and the type of compliance workflow that's going to help you pass in both internal and external audits, define group management, as well as security and IT integrations, incident management, data level security, user roles management, human resource integrations, portal management, self-monitoring, and as well as looking at how to import and export data in, options. So these are the base products to really give you a much tighter control, as well as the process on who has what access data, how it should be accessed, and how that management of the security policy should be flowed through across the entire enterprise. We have a vulnerability assessment product that would essentially help assess the risk of the environment, generate the assessment reports, provide data protection subscriptions, configuration change recommendations, and remediation actions when we identify risk, and generate entitlement reports on who has access to what data, particularly on privileged users that have an ability to access large quantity and large volumes of data, as well as ongoing protection with updates on configuration and system risks and patches, and testing for the environment to ensure that the environment is well protected. We also have an encryption product that encrypts data at rest. It could be encrypted at the file level, the role-based, as well as the database level, and also provide role-based access control of the keys and encryption activities, as well as file access auditing. We have another product from Optum called data masking. Essentially, it's static masking that is very useful for a test environment where you could mask the data and subset that information for testing and development, or even ship to a third party for development and testing purposes. It does preserve the semantic and formats so that you would have a true accurate testing without risking the sensitive information when shipping that either from the production databases, data sources, to a test environment or development environment, either within the company or outside. When we do activity monitoring, we basically look at every query that comes into a database and ensure that we would review the security policies that you have defined for us to monitor, and we would send out real-time alerts on any activities that you want to be alert to, as well as identifying who is the end application user, the originating IP addresses, generates compliance reports, and has centralized control, and also help to normalize the audit creation and automate the reporting and audit process, and help with simpler, easier, and much faster compliance with all the corporate policies, as well as governmental policies, and such as SOX, HIPAA, as well as PCI DSS. So Guardium can help reduce that level of complexity and automate that reporting process and audit compliance. In terms of protection and preventing data losses, the advanced data monitoring activity product would not only send real-time alerts of activities, but we also have the ability to block unauthorized accesses and quarantine users if that's basically if we identify that not only they have unauthorized access, but if they have unusual level of activities. So if, say, your system administrator or your DBA typically do not go and access the customer table with all the customer information, several times a day, or try to retrieve more than the normal number of records, say normally they may retrieve one record for whatever reason, but they end up retrieving 1,000 records for each query. That could be considered a normal level activity, and we could actually do a quarantine on it and send real-time alerts to help you enforce and prevent quote-unquote unauthorized access from privileged users or anyone who managed to steal the authorized user's credentials. For sensitive documents, we also have a product that helps to redact that information so that whoever has access to the document would not see the sensitive information such as an account number or someone's government ID number, but they still would have right to access the documents, just not the sensitive information. Lastly, we have a new product, which I could go into more detail later. It's called application data masking. We're able to mask sensitive data on demand on the browser for any application that sends data to the browser. So in essence, we have a total solution around data privacy and security across a plethora of platforms, not only on transactional data, but also on warehouse data, as well as big data for Hadoop or NoSQL. So let me go a little bit more detail about vulnerability assessment. But before I do that, let me just give you a view of how Guardium is architected. You could see that, in this scenario, we showed that, there are different IT centers for a very large enterprise. Guardium supports a small customer deployment scenario of anywhere from one database server to, thousands of servers, and it could spread across, different geographies as well. So in essence, what we do is we install an agent on the database server at the operating system level. We intercept all queries before it goes into the database so that we can monitor activities in real time and send alerts on any type of abnormal, unauthorized activity in real time. We also have a Harden device we call a collector. That is our repository for all the monitor records that we generate. And unlike a native database logging, we basically perform a lot of the work on the collector, so that removes the overhead from the database server itself. That's number one. Number two, we are able to do this before the query goes into the database, so we can do the analysis as well as be able to prevent unauthorized accesses. And number three, we actually normalize the records that are pertinent and standardize that, so the amount of data that's stored is going to be more significant in terms of real value to detecting what is going on, but also require a lot less storage. So if you want to do some post-analysis reporting, it's much faster, easier to go and detect what you like to see and generate overall reporting on that basis. The other aspect of the collector is that when we have this Harden device, and it could be either in a software type of form factor, you could even deploy it as a virtual machine environment on the cloud if you need to, or it could be on a physical server device. What is really truly exceptional for Guardium with this type of environment is that when we harden a device, there's a true separation of duty between the privileged users versus what we have collected with an auditable repository of data records. Privileged users will not be able to access any of that data and alter it. So it's a true separation of duty environment that is going to satisfy the auditors and help prevent unauthorized insider changes. My favorite example is, the U.S. government, the National Security Administration, the Edward Snowden incident, right? You know, he was a system administrator. He managed to steal credentials from his fellow system administrator, penetrate into the most secure NSA, basically the U.S. spy agency, and collect millions of documents, right? And manage to basically disclose that not only to the press, but also offer that to China and Russia, so you know he could gain protection from government prosecution from the United States and extradition. So it's a key concept in terms of what Guardium could do to prevent unauthorized access and separation of duty, and basically keep the audit records intact, and no one could modify that. Not only that, we could detect anyone trying to temper it, and basically let you know that hey, this record or this repository of auditable records has been changed or has attempted to change, and so that you could respond accordingly. Let me come back now to the vulnerability assessment. So what we're able to do is to really scan all the database environments, all the server environments, both from the OS level as well as on the database level, to assess the risk. And we will generate a report of what tests, and we run hundreds of these tests, and let you know which tests failed and what the recommended remedial actions are. And actually, when you run these reports before an audit, it's going to help you significantly reduce the cost of compliance by being able to respond proactively and put in a much more secure environment. Lastly, I wanted to come back to this deployment scenario when you have multiple data centers or multiple collectors across different clusters of databases. The way we help you do a centralized policy control and management and a centralized audit repository is through what we call an aggregator. You could see it on the right-hand side where it says Central Policy Managers. So you could actually have one single security policy that is deployed and implemented across the entire company, regardless of the location of your IT centers and where your data resides. Okay. So this chart shows what the risk assessment report looks like. So we have a high-level summary of the results in terms of different types of tests, and we classify them in terms of critical, major, minor, caution information type of test that you passed or failed. And you could see that we also have a progress report on the right-hand side that shows that the progression of the pass failed tests and showed the progress of your remedial actions. And the latter half of the report shows the different types of tests we ran, what failed on the left-hand side, and then the results and the recommendations for remedial actions on the right-hand side. On the upper left-hand corner, we do give an overall passing score in addition to the progress report for each iteration of the test run. So we not only give you the overall view, but also give you a prioritized breakdown and allow you to be able to filter and control what you want to see, and the detail of the test results that fail. In terms of protecting sensitive data, we have a number of ways to help do that. So, first and foremost, we could replace sensitive data with basically fictional data. This is the optomasking function where we would preserve the format and semantics, but the data we would replace with is fictional. So the sensitive data is, is preserved, protected, but the integrity of the data in terms of the testing environment is preserved, so that you have confidence in your test environment and the data that you're testing without risking disclosure of sensitive information. In terms of protecting the unstructured documents, we could certainly do the redaction in the second piece where, we could just black out or XX out the sensitive information. So people who have access to the documents themselves, such as your credit card statements that's come into your email, your account number is redacted, right? So that it doesn't show that, even if someone managed to steal your, get a hold of your email, they would not be able to get a hold of your entire account information. So lastly is the encryption part. We could certainly encrypt the data at rest, right? And so that you can encrypt it and prevent the unauthorized, even if, I should take it back, when you encrypt the data, people who access that data, who are able to see that data, if they're authorized, if not, they won't be able to see it. And certainly, if people who manage to steal that file that has encrypted data without the decryption key, they will not be able to see that information. Built into our excuse me, built into our structured masking functions, we do have predefined functions to help with the masking sensitive data in terms of names, geography, location, credit card numbers, telephone numbers, email addresses, and so on and so forth. So that these predefined functions facilitate customers to more readily mask the sensitive information without having to create your own algorithms. Okay. Now, I've already talked a bit more, a bit about, how the Guardium monitors real-time data and how it's organized and architected to scale from one database server to thousands of them. I think that what I want to highlight here is the ability for us to do the continuous monitoring in real time and send that alerts. And our monitoring alerts are really policy-based that allow customers to define what they want to monitor, who are the privileged users, what are they authorized to access, so that we could, monitor and detect specifics based on your environment, your privileged users, and to be able to detect and alert and also prevent unauthorized accesses and data loss. So it certainly is an automated way of help you to ensure compliance, prevent data losses, and threats even from sophisticated advanced threats. The reason being is that we're sitting so close to the database level, and that you're not going to get the kind of false positives that you have to dig through and figure out what is going on. You will know exactly who is accessing what data and what is the username, the tables they're trying to access, and where is the IP address. It's basically very directed, specific, based on what you tell us to monitor and send alerts to you. So they're really well filtered, really minimize the false positives environment that a perimeter defense is most customers are struggling with it. They just get too many false positives. They really don't have the time or the resources to dig into many of them. And having Guardium sitting right on top of the database, really looking at specifics in terms of the actual activity that is basically violating the security policies that you define, give you very specific, actionable alerts in real time. Okay. Now, again, this is another chart I want to show in terms of the architecture for Guardium, in addition to the range of database platforms that we support. So what we do is that we also, have a product that you can install at the data server level called the Escape. This is the product. This is actually the agent that would be performing the blocking and quarantining of users. So there's a key difference between us collecting the data and setting alerts and having Escape being a proactive preventer of unauthorized access and quarantining that access and sending alerts to let you know that we have blocked this access and we have quarantined this user. And let you know if you want to take any actions and do that in real time. I touched upon that, using database logs is not a very effective way to do data activity monitoring, preventing data unauthorized accesses. First and foremost, they cannot prevent. Right? It's using negative database logging is really the most typically homegrown solution by most customers. They think that they just turn on database logging, they would be able to find out what's going on. In reality, that's not the case at all. First and foremost, database logging generates a lot of information, and if you try to filter it down, you may lose some critical information. Then you don't have an audit trail. But more importantly, if you want to prevent privileged users from not altering those records, there's no way you could do that with the database native logging, because a system administrator or DBA, by definition, would have access to database logs that they could alter. In fact, that's what Edward Snowden had done. He actually went in and altered the logs, the system logs and the database logs. So even NSA, could not really figure out for a long, long time how he managed to steal millions of records, right? So it's a real key concept for data security in terms of separation of duties, preventing privileged users from the ability to, give them unauthorized accesses, as well as erasing the audit trail of what they had done, right? So this is key. I don't want to go into a lot more details, but certainly database logging generates a lot more overhead, and it's not tamper-proof, and it's not real-time, and it's not a preventive solution. So in summary, for Guardium, it's a real-time data activity monitoring, right? It helps to discover and classify sensitive information. We would monitor activities in real time. We can block and mask information, and we could help with compliance automation, either internal or external, or government regulation, and help significantly reduce the cost. We would basically help customers, define granular real-time security policies in terms of who, what, when, and how, and detect even abnormal levels of activities so that you could react much faster, much sooner, and and prevent data losses and mitigate the damage. The new application we have is called a dynamic data masking, or basically Guardium for applications. So what we're able to do is at the application level, right, be able to monitor who should have access to what sensitive information before it's sent over the buyer and be presented to a web browser. Let me give you an example of that on the next page. So this is a report of an authorized user before the data is masked in the top view. You could see that the office phone numbers is displayed when a person is authorized to see that information. Now, when phone numbers are not authorized to be viewed by everybody, then you want to be able to mask that and mask that on demand, and that's where the Guardium for application comes in, right? So we take the same architecture as the activity monitoring. Now we're able to apply that to web applications for data in motion, and basically help you to be able to control the display of sensitive information to a web application only to authorized users, and you know, it has a number of uses in terms of not only protecting an end user, but also in terms of the, you know, outsourcing of the, you know, development, as well as you know, doing online applications for any type of the e-commerce solutions. Okay. So let me just wanted to reiterate that one of Guardium's very strong points is that we support a huge number of data sources, and you could apply a single security policy across all these data sources, and that is going to basically help you significantly reduce the cost of providing a total secure solution across all your databases, all your data sources, regardless of the geography. You know, instead of you trying to go and manage different servers on your own across different places and keeping track of who's implementing what policy where, we automate all of that overhead complexity for you, simplify it, and not only that, it has that centralized management and control so that you could see it all in one report and track progress across the entire enterprise. No other vendor has this ability, has this breadth of support and capability, and to be able to simply and effectively provide that centralized control, centralized audit repository, and centralized compliance. So next, we help customers reduce the total cost of providing network security and data protection, and we help customers automate change management from a centralized location, reduce the performance overhead, and improve performance across all your data platforms, and have built-in architecture to scale without impacting performance. And we also help with integrating with the IT structure, and also be able to help customize any of the government regulation policies that you want to add, and also any feeds that is not the standard platforms out there. If you have some customized application and solution that you want to add on, we have a universal feed that help you to be able to modify that and add to Guardium as well. So integration, performance of scalability, and automated change management, all of that combined reduces complexity, reduces the need for high skills to be able to implement a thorough and robust security environment, and as well as help you to be able to, pass audits and meet compliance regulations much easier and simpler and much lower cost. So this last chart is really around how Guardium is integrated with a plethora of products, both within IBM and with other products. It's certainly with the SIM product, I think many customers have some kind of SIM product, and obviously IBM has the industry-leading QRadar product. So we would send any type of real-time alerts to the SIM environment and to QRadar, so that you could apply real-time intelligence and actionable intelligence actions or remedial actions across the entire enterprise and detect whether or not that IP address that comes with this unauthorized access is something that's already on radar, should be added to the radar, and what actions you want to take against it. Okay, so in summary, Guardium is the leader in the data protection market. We have the most comprehensive portfolio in terms of support and controls, and also help with compliance and integration with security and IT operations. And we have industry-leading data protection and privacy technology recognized by analysts, and also a flexible and cost-effective way to seamlessly implement and scale and lower your total cost of protection. Quickly, just a view of some of the leading companies across the world are using Guardium across a broad range of industries, across banks, retailers, insurers, the healthcare providers, government agencies, as well as telecommunications industry, and I would say any and all companies that have customer data that's concerned about protecting their intellectual property and strategic plans needs to think about how to protect that crown jewels in the company, that's critical assets. And Guardium, I think, is the product that's going to help you easily and quickly and securely do that. A quick view, some customer examples. The New York Stock Exchange uses Guardium to help with their SOX compliance on their SAP ERP application. A major U.S. retailer, they actually encrypt the data at rest. They have tens of thousands of database servers across their stores worldwide, and they use Guardium to encrypt the data and protect all of them. So even if someone managed to go to the store and walk off with one of their servers, the data is protected. Another large digital retailer, deploy on Hadoop, and they use Guardium to help them with their PCI compliance. So this is just a quick view of some of the use case scenarios and how customers are using Guardium. Okay, I'm done, and I'll pass it over to Riyaz, and he's going to pass it over to Avinash.
Hi, thanks for the overview, Cindy. My name is Avinash. I work as a solutions architect at Paladion, and I'll take you through a quick implementation case study of the Guardium database activity monitoring solution for a large customer of ours. So the agenda will be sweet and short, I promise you. So we'll quickly take you through an overview of what were the drivers which moved the client to look at a database activity monitoring solution in the first place, how InfoSphere Guardium solution fitted these requirements, and how Paladion added some value by optimizing the whole implementation conundrum. We look at the deployment architecture and a couple of quick benefits. So the requirement snapshot was in such a way that the bank was looking to move from the existing core banking application solution to a new core banking application solution, and this involved a lot of heterogeneous databases, and also complexity increased in the way in terms of how these databases were actually accessed. Now, the first thing which people would think is that you can just enable the native audit logs, and your monitoring is done. Like Cindy mentioned, other than the reason she gave you in the presentation, the most important thing is that the nature of native audit logs is that they are resource intensive, and the databases which were running at that point of time were already at functioning at optimal performance. So there could not be a performance impact in the first place. They also needed to meet the database monitoring standards with the compliances of ISO 27002, as the existing solution was such that the whole workflow reporting was manual, leading to an increased turnaround time in getting your compliance reports in place. Time means money, so the costs also went up. A huge infrastructure limitation, the network tap was unavailable. And in short, the kind of features which the client was looking at was having lightweight agents, which ensured that the database performances and the load was not affected. Since there were so many types of databases, there need to be a centralized management for the same, and also taking proactive actions in terms of blocking the suspicious activity based on the whole traffic analysis. So InfoSphere Guardium successfully addressed all these requirements. While most other solutions in the market went on focusing on how the traffic itself could be analyzed better, Guardium did a very smart thing in terms of focusing on the STAP agent, which basically collects all the activity-related traffic information. It is very lightweight, and so it does not affect your performance much. So, other than using an STAP agent, what were the options we had considered? We also considered, some people said that network tap could be used. It was not available, and even if network tap had to be used, it has a problem in terms of handling the encrypted traffic. Now, the other option was to do port mirroring. The issue with that was that you need to have additional hardware in terms of a switch. The switch itself might have limitations in terms of how many span ports it could use. Most importantly, port mirroring works on the concept of working on a copy of the network traffic and not on the traffic itself. So even if some suspicious activity is detected, the TCP reset cannot be done in time to ensure that the session is terminated. So the deployment and the STAP agent is, like I said, lightweight. It has about not more than 2 to 4% database impact and performance, and works on the actual traffic. As a result of which, the TCP resets can happen in time to ensure that the session is terminated. Not all traffic is sent to the collector appliance itself, so something can happen at the agent level itself, so network load goes down. So as a result of which, the database performance is minimally impacted. You also have the collector appliance, which basically inspects the data stream and helps monitor the database activity. Now, since there are multiple collectors deployed here, you need a central manager, also called an aggregator or a policy manager, to help manage the multiple components centrally. Now, how did Paladion approach in terms of implementing it? We had a detailed 5-step deployment option. So first we plan. When we say planning, we understand what the requirement is in depth, finalize the scope of work and a beta version of the deployment plan, and also identify the risks, the constraints, and also finalize on a UAT plan. The organize section of our implementation approach talks about the locations which are under purview, what are the policies or methods in which we can perform the backup, the archiving, and the purging, and coming up with a plan for the same. Finalizing the systems configuration and ensuring that the prerequisites are in place. The execution plan is the actual installation of components and verifying connections between the various components and configuring the policies which need to realize the use cases. The testing is in terms of developing the SOP, performing the user awareness testing, and also train the users. Delivering the solution is we're finally going live. Whether the port implementation will work or any rework is required on the front, and reviewing the SLA as well. This is a standard deployment architecture of how we have done at the DC level in the client side. So you have a database server farm. The database server farm, like I mentioned, has a disparate heterogeneous database solutions. For example, you have Oracle on AX, MS SQL on Windows, DB2 on Linux, etc., etc. So the XTAP agents will sit on each of these database servers. So you have GIM, which is actually the Guardium installation manager. This could be used for something like, say, an Oracle on AIX. You have an STAP agent on Windows and an STAP agent on Unix or Linux. And you also have your change audit systems on your Unix or Windows, depending on what is the database being used here. You have a set of collectors which then get information from the tab itself, and they are via the firewall. They are sent into the aggregator central manager, which can then take the remedial action based on an SSH or an HTTPS or the Guardium administrator taking actions on either the mail server or the FTP server, etc. The DR architecture is likewise a database server farm. The only thing you see here is that all the information is directly sent to the collector manager, and there is no central collector in place here. This is because the percentage of DR did not warrant for a set of collectors in place itself in the DR location. So coming to what would be the key use cases deployed. So one is in terms of monitoring policies. What is the privilege user audit? So instead of, there are different ways in which you can look at database monitoring policies. The privilege user audit looks at auditing the actual users who you think are critical and not at the application traffic itself. All other connections are ignored. So the STAP filters out most of the sessions, and only a subset of the specific traffic is sent to the collector for further analysis. The advantage here is, one, you are looking at specific users and not at the overall traffic, and since you are not looking at the overall traffic, the network load is reduced. The second thing which we do is a sensitive object audit. Sensitive object audit refers to those places where your critical information is stored. So you are only auditing those specific databases activity and what we call as a sensitive object, and also for some set of specific commands. Now the STAP in this case, since the analysis ability itself is not there, you are directly sending all the traffic to the collector, and hence the collector will then look at what actions need to be taken based on the relevancy of the traffic monitored. Now there is no silver bullet here saying that you should do only privileged user audit or sensitive object audit. Ideally, both of these kinds of audits should be done to monitor at both to ensure that specific users are also audited, and at the same time your your crown jewels, as Cindy mentioned, or your sensitive objects are protected. So in terms of your so before I go ahead, something which might have come as a question to you guys when you saw the word APT in the topic of the webinar itself. And so what happens as part of an APT? So or how does Guardium address the whole the critical. So what happens as an APT? You are affected, you're infected. The exploit runs, some kind of malware in terms of a binary or a drop or download is downloaded onto your system. Once it downloads, the exe file executes. The exe file executes, and then subject to bypassing the specific proxies or whatever controls you have in place, a callback goes to your command and control server, and then at a very inappropriate time and at a very inappropriate location, somebody tries to exfiltrate your data, like Cindy had mentioned. So what Guardium does from an APT perspective is to have an eye on the most critical component of an APT attack, or rather the most monetarily attractive component for a hacker, which is data exfiltration. Now how does it do it? So some of the few security monitoring policies we look at is failed logins. For example, if somebody is trying to brute force into your database and you have more than a couple of login failures from the same user in a couple of minutes, you know that it's a brute force attack, and you can then take some remedial action to quarantine that user or something on those lines. SQL errors, for example. So for example, if there are so many SQL errors from the same user session in a certain point of time, the command is not being run properly. If you're a database administrator, you will know what command to run. So this again could be an indicator of an attack. Specific definition language commands being run at a wrong time when the session is not supposed to take place at all. Creating, altering, or dropping commands. No manipulation in the in sense of either looking to insert or update or delete records, and no control as well in terms of granting or revoking permissions. So again, like I said, like sensitive objects, an example of sensitive objects in this case was the bank had to be PCI compliant. So all the databases which were under the purview of PCI compliance were identified as sensitive objects and they were audited. Data masking, again, like Cindy had mentioned, that specific information could be masked from the info file. The case study apart, this could be a very relevant scenario where you are running like an outsourcing industry or something of the sorts, where you have the front teller who needs the information, but when the information is going out, it needs to be masked because it is you're handling sensitive client data. Now, some special use cases, something we looked at is in terms of the the configuration audit system. So what happens as part of this, most of your companies must be running a significant vulnerability management program. As part of that, you must be having secure configuration documents in the way in which your database as an asset should be configured. Now, the configuration audit system, what it does is it constantly monitors for any changes to this configuration, and in case something happens, and then checks to see if whether this was within the change control process or not. A big check in terms of data exfiltration, because somebody might, and as terms of the activities they take up to ensure data exfiltration is taking place, it might require a configuration change. If this is caught, your APT attack is also, kind of turned up. Vulnerability assessment, again, you check to see, like misconfigured privileges, your weak passwords, or unauthorized changes. Cindy, as part of the report, also mentioned that a lot of the attack happens on the web server and the database server. A classic case of SQL injection. So what happens on an SQL injection? You log into the web forms. You try to make some changes in the parameters, and when this data is moving from the web server to a database server, if this is detected by the vulnerability scanning itself, so before the socket connection from the web server onto the database server happens, it is terminated. Again, entitlement reporting in terms, that say I am a super user, I have granted certain roles to another user, so on and so forth. Entitlement reporting keeps track of how this flow is going, and any changes happening to this flow immediately alerts. So how did the bank benefit? The comprehensive auditing of databases was happening. The policies were enforced real time. No need for audit logs. Change control and user-based activities were taken care of. The compliance with ISO 27002 and the PCI was also taken care of. And since the whole workflow itself is customized, the turnaround time and costs also reduced. STAP agents were configured to monitor the database OS level traffic, and it is capable of handling encrypted traffic without taking the database server offline. Now, the STAP agent, like I said, is a lightweight agent, filter traffic, specific traffic which is sent to the collector, and the load on the database and the network in general is significantly reduced without affecting the database performance. So this is how Paladion helped a client of ours to ensure that their compliance needs, their database activity monitoring needs, and their securing themselves against the data exfiltration component of an APT attack was taken care of.